In the Navy, we're fighting in 3D. This is Sega Masters. Pretty fancy title screen with some jamming music to boot. As we continue through the spring months of 1989, today we'll be looking at Poseidon Wars 3D. And if you hadn't guessed by the suffix, we're getting a long overdue visit with the increasingly neglected SegaScope 3D glasses. Yes, Sega somehow realized their 3D specs still existed and saw fit to put out a cartridge for them, even though they were already starting to go the way of other short-lived innovative gimmicks around this time. Incidentally, this cartridge has a 2D mode that can be toggled at any time by pushing button 1 on the second controller, which is what I did to record the footage. According to the intro, the country is threatened by a crisis of some sort, and your inner patriotism has somehow convinced you to enlist in the Navy to defend your homeland. You must first complete the training portion of the game, which consists of 5 missions, the first 4 of which can be challenged in any order you choose, but all must be beaten before you can gain access to the 5th mission. Once you pick your starting level, you take to the seas in the USS Poseidon, looking to engage the enemy armada in open combat. That's right, despite what the title might suggest, this cart focuses on naval warfare and has nothing to do with the Grecian deity. In any case, a number of hostile air and sea craft will eventually appear in the playing area, and you must guide your targeting cursor across the screen to pick them off. The Poseidon is armed with a pair of cannons and a limited supply of surface-to-surface missiles, and you have your sonar and radar to help lead you towards your targets. And that's basically the extent of the gameplay in this cartridge, just taking out the targets that come into view before they strike back at you with their artillery. If this whole setup feels like something out of an early 1980s arcade game, you're not wrong. As it turns out, Poseidon Wars is actually a re-imaging of an earlier coin-op title Sega released way back in 1982, Sub-Rock 3D. At its core, it too was a simple shooting gallery style contest, where you had to pick off a number of targets that appeared on the screen while avoiding their projectiles. While not the most remembered of Sega's arcade catalog, Sub-Rock is notable for presenting the action in 3D thanks to a special eyepiece designed to mimic a periscope. It even used shutter technology not unlike the SegaScope specs. What convinced Sega to repurpose a 7-year-old arcade title for their console, thinking it was going to help them compete with Nintendo's offerings, is anyone's guess. Regardless, you just have to eliminate targets and survive the level long enough for the so-called boss ship to appear. Unlike the arcade game, you don't instantly die after suffering one hit. Instead, Poseidon Wars gives you a damage meter that allows you to take a number of shots before the Poseidon is done in. Though sustaining too many hits can cause several of your ship's functions to break, such as the radar, sonar, and even your guns. You also have to keep an eye on your fuel meter, and need to blast the red ships that often pop up in the horizon to replenish it. Eventually the game alerts you to the boss ship's arrival by abruptly changing the background music. Simply take it out before it does its aim to you and you pass the mission. You're awarded points based on your performance throughout the battle and must accumulate a total of 15,000 points at the end of the 5 training missions to graduate your naval training. Then you pick your next mission and it's back into the fray for more of the same. Be aware the damage you incurred during the previous skirmish is only repaired at the completion of every 2 missions, otherwise it carries over to the next level, including any compromised functions and not leaving you with a large margin of error during each level. Much like the other 3D carts, most of the effort in Poseidon Wars seem to have been put toward the 3D effects, which aren't the most technically impressive compared to a few of its SegaScope brethren. But the parallax scrolling for the ocean waves do give it a decent sense of depth. Otherwise, all you see throughout your session are the same types of airplanes and ships over and over, none of which really stand out. And even the exact same scenery, with the somewhat pointless day-night cycle being the only thing that adds any variety to the visuals. You are treated to some rather catchy music during the battle. Too bad the tunes are often drowned out by the scratchy sound effects. And of course, 3D effects aren't enough to compensate for the cart's repetitive and tedious gameplay, which definitely shows its 80s arcade roots. Each of the levels in Poseidon Wars claim to have a different objective, such as saving a port or taking out a specific gunship, but they're mostly irrelevant as the levels all play out in just about the exact same fashion, including nearly identical boss ships. Despite relying on a D-pad instead of a light gun like you'd expect, the controls work for the most part, though some squirrely shooting physics pop up on occasion and force you to lead your target sight by a couple of pixels to actually register a hit on something. It also doesn't help that the pacing is somewhat inconsistent and lacks the intensity of its arcade parent. Subrock kept you on your toes with constant barrages of foes. Here you may be left sitting there with nothing happening one minute, the next you may be faced with several enemies at once before things calm back down again. Should you complete the 5th training mission and have accumulated 15,000 total points, you've passed your naval training and apparently qualified to take part in the real battle. The Expert stage, as it's referred to, offers 8 new levels of combat to fight through, and much like the training portion, the first 7 levels can be tackled in any order you choose, with the final level being unlocked upon completion of the other 7. Unfortunately, the action in this portion of the game is pretty much identical to the training missions, with no new features or challenges introduced, other than a few enemy types. Finishing each of these levels with a certain score advances your rank, all the way to Fleet Admiral, though again no actual rewards come with each new title you're awarded. And for those curious, this cart does have an ending, though it's not really worth slogging through 15 total stages of the same tedious gameplay to see it. In the end, Poseidon Wars is yet another shallow 3D cartridge that tries to get by entirely on its gimmick and doesn't quite succeed. Its early 80s gameplay style feels antiquated compared to what Nintendo was offering on their console at this time, and there's just enough depth of variety to keep you interested for more than a few minutes, which is more than enough to see everything this cart has to offer. I'm not saying it's a completely bad game, it may be a decent time waster for quick sessions, but unlike its regal namesake, it won't be ruling the seas anytime soon.